Hello and welcome back to the MLB Rundown. I'm your host, Josh Shepardson. You can find me on Twitter where I post as at BChat50, and I'm joined by CBSSports.com's RJ White, and you can follow him on Twitter where he posts as at RJWhite1. This week's Riding the Wave piece featured was headlined by a couple of multi-position eligible players, and they're always useful in fantasy leagues. I feel like they're the underrated guys, the glue guys of a roster is how I like to think of them. And those two players that you discussed were Brock Holt and Justin Turner. And after discussing both, you came to the conclusion that you like Turner more than Holt. So I'm going to let you have the floor. Why don't you tell me a little bit about Justin Turner and why you like him more than Holt?
Yeah, well, I like both guys, and I snapped up Holt in the points league with a short bench last week. That's a type of league where I think he could be most effective, but the reason I picked him up is that Justin Turner wasn't even available. While Holt hasn't shown much power or speed to help fantasy owners, getting things done largely on the back of a large BABIP, Turner's posted a high average while also delivering in power categories as well. He's racked up 10 homers and 35 RBI. His BABIP isn't incredibly high at 333, so even if his high homer to fly ball rate drops, I still think he'll maintain a quality batting average to go at least with some power. Dave Cameron of Fangraphs pointed out this week that over a 365-day stretch extending from the middle of last season to this week, Turner's posted the second best WRC plus in baseball in the entire league behind Paul Goldschmidt. You know, maybe it probably won't last. He's probably not the second best hitter in baseball long term, but that's certainly a long enough stretch of incredible play to make him worth owning in all leagues at this point. You know, so I would grab him where he's available. I'd use him, especially if you can get him in a league that he's eligible at shortstop, where he played 15 games last year. He's close to being eligible at second base in many leagues because he has 4 games of a second base play this year. So I think he can help you in multiple places. Obviously, you'd like to play him at shortstop in those type of leagues. So that's what I would grab him, especially if I needed help at shortstop.
Yeah, and an interesting point you brought up with both, and I think it is very important to highlight, is that, I mean, yes, the plan might be to use him at shortstop, and you articulated this perfectly with your team scenario. But an injury may beset your team, or ineffectiveness from a player that you counted on, like in your case, Robinson Cano, and all of a sudden that you find some value in sticking them at that position, especially if you scoop someone else off the wire that is hot. And in your case, that was Brandon Crawford. So definitely something that that adds to the value of these guys. But one question that did come to mind when reading the article, and something I did want to touch on the podcast, is you'd mentioned some possible competition at the hot corner eventually for Turner, but I'm wondering if you're at all concerned about Corey Seager. I mean, we're in full-blown prospect frenzy mode right now with all of these great prospects being called up, and Corey Seager is basically the best prospect left in the minors. Most likely he would be taking Jimmy Rollins' job at shortstop. I know there was talk at one time that he might have to move off of shortstop to third base, but I can't see the Dodgers doing that, at least not in season. Maybe in the off season they make that transition, but if they view him as a shortstop long term, I don't see them putting a Band-Aid on their squad and just sticking him at third base, especially when Turner's played well. But just adding another name to that infield mix, does that concern you at all?
Not really. Like you said, I don't think they're going to move him to third base immediately. You know, there's long-term concern he'll have to move there, but I think if he does come up, it makes more sense to play him at shortstop. You know, where you could sit Jimmy Rollins most of the time. You can give him, you know, a part-time job. Rollins hasn't hit particularly well. He's played average defense. The player who could threaten Turner is Hector Olivera, who was handed a huge contract this offseason. He figures to get a shot at starting in the majors sooner rather than later. He's hit well in a short time in the minors, but he's placed on the disabled list this week with a mild hamstring strain, so it's not like his promotion is imminent. However, even if he does come up, it's certainly possible that he won't immediately play every day. After all, the Dodgers still haven't given an everyday role to another prize acquisition internationally, Alex Guerrero. I figure Turner and Oliveira could share the third base role starting soon after the All-Star break. And that's not even going to be a big detriment to Turner's fantasy value because he's been sharing that role all season for the most part. I think Alberto Callaspo's started roughly, 40% of the games over the last month or so since being brought over from the Braves. And Juan Uribe was the guy stuck at third base before that. So I figure those two will share the third base role if Oliveira comes up. But considering how good Turner's offense has been both this season and last, I think he's worth owning even in a part-time role, at least until he cools off, if that ever happens.
Yeah, and it has to be comforting that the fact that Alex Guerrero has played well at the big league level and still hasn't managed to just crack regular at-bats just because he's getting paid. I think that bodes well for them not just handing the job to Hector Olivera. I mean, yes, they paid him, but I don't think that this is the type of ownership and management group that's just going to say, well, we got to justify our expenditure by playing him. Not when they're in the thick of the NL West race and the playoff hunt. So I'm with you. I don't think Turner gets bumped from that role, at least not immediately. And even if he does, I think it's a modest decrease in playing time. I think he's still going to get fairly regular playing time. And he's been a surprise over the last year. But as you said, that's almost a full season of plate appearances and work there. So I really do like Turner. I think he's a nice addition if he is available at this point in your leagues. And even if he's not, he's the type of guy that makes for an interesting throw-in in trades. He's not a superstar, so he shouldn't be the most difficult player to pry away, but you get a two-for-two deal together, get him in there as a toss-in type of player, and all of a sudden you've got some interesting value on your roster.
Yeah, I go with that too. Another guy to point out that the Dodgers' philosophy on paying guys big but not necessarily playing them all the time is Andre Ethier. We know he's been riding a high contract for a while, and his playing time has gone up this year, but that's mostly due to injury. When everybody was healthy, they wanted to go Crawford, Peterson, and Puig, across the outfield, and they were comfortable sitting a guy making, I think, $18 million a year, and having him play just sporadically. So just the fact that Oliveira is getting paid, like you said, doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to play every day.
And it's interesting that you bring up the outfield situation because they've already stated that when Carl Crawford gets back, another guy who's getting paid well, he's going to have to earn his playing time. It's not just going to be given to him based on the fact that he was paid like a starter and opened the year there. So really it seems like a playing – how you're playing merit-based system in Los Angeles, the way it really should be, but unfortunately isn't in all cases. But moving on, one player that you discussed in the popular ads this week was Marco Estrada. I mean, I'm with you. Where did this production come from? He's on a heater in the month of June. What do you have to add with Marco Estrada?
Yeah, it's no surprise he's a popular ad at this point because he's been phenomenal for 2 straight starts. Chased a no-hitter into the 8th inning 2 starts ago, and then did the same with a perfect game in his last start, which ended with him delivering 8 2/3 scoreless innings and racking up 10 strikeouts. Those are great numbers, no matter who what the name is behind him and no matter what the history is behind him. It's kind of the thing you'd expect over a guy like Kershaw, While that last start in particular is enough to earn him consideration in any league, I don't necessarily think he's on his way to being a fantasy ace. While his ratios look like he's delivering similarly to his peak in 2012 and 2013, he hasn't flashed a strikeout or walk rate at those past levels, and his 243 BABIP is due for some regression, I think. His xFIP isn't buying the big step forward either. His 4.21 mark this year is actually slightly behind his xFIP from last year, in which he had a 4.36 ERA with similar strikeout and walk rates to his performance this year. Now, I don't mind adding him over guys like Tommy Malone and other waiver wire fodder like that, but I'm not dropping anyone I think has long-term value to add Estrada, thinking that this is his new normal.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. And one thing I usually like to do when I see a pitcher making a breakthrough type of performance, even if it's only over a couple starts, is check out their Brooks Baseball page, see if there's any monster changes either to their pitch mix or their velocity. Velocity is about what it normally is for Estrada, so nothing there, not a huge shocker. I mean, he's a veteran. This isn't a young arm who's suddenly discovering new velocity. One thing I did find interesting is throughout his career, he's mixed in a cutter on occasion. He didn't throw any in the month of April. He threw them at 5.8% of the time in the month of May, and he's kicked that up to 10.09% this month. Not a big bat missing pitch, and for a guy who induces a ton of fly balls, which isn't ideal for the Rogers Center, it is nice seeing that the cutter that he's throwing does have a solid ground ball rate north of 50%. So it is something that you can maybe point to, adding a little bit of depth to his repertoire, helping, but again, I don't think he's going to pitch like an ace like he has, as you said. But I do think he's worth an interesting ad because maybe there is something to this new pitch mix, making him a little bit more effective and helping him keep that xFIP, beat that xFIP. I know his home run per fly ball rate is down, which is shocking for a guy who has had home run issues throughout his career and one who pitches at the Rogers Center. But I think in 12-team mixed leagues or larger, if you need some pitching help, definitely worth grabbing, definitely worth riding this hot streak out and seeing if maybe this new pitch mix can help him at least sustain back of the rotation success. Would you agree?
I'd agree, and it should go without saying that if, in even deeper leagues, if he was owned and if I was his owner, going into this stretch, I'd certainly be looking to sell high at this point because obviously his value isn't going to get any higher than what he's done his last two starts. So I'm throwing him out there in trade scenarios. I'm trying to upgrade him to a more locked in pitcher, a top 50 type pitcher that I think is going to help my team more over the long run.
Yeah, and the nice thing about that sales pitch is he is backed by a good offense. So a team maybe that's starved for wins in a roto league and trying to make up some ground, you might have a little bit, might be able to get a little bit more out of Marco Estrada and Deal than you should otherwise be able to get. The last player that we were going to touch on is another Blue Jay. Why don't you tell us about their backstop that you're suggesting adding in deep leagues?
Yeah, Dioner Navarro was actually a solid second catcher option coming into the season, as he delivered double-digit homers in his last two seasons while also posting respectable averages. He even hit 300 with 13 homers in just 240 at-bats in 2013. Though the Blue Jays added Russell Martin, the thinking was that Navarro would get enough at-bats at designated hitter to give him a shot at fantasy relevance. Or the team could swap him to fill a need somewhere else, which is something I think could still happen as we get closer to the trade deadline. This year, Navarro was sidelined for an extended stretch due to injury that caused him to miss the end of April and all of May, but he's been solid since returning. He's even seen pretty regular at-bats at catcher and designated hitter over the last week. He's 6 for 13 with a pair of homers in his last 3 games. Now, he isn't an option in anything but the deepest of one-catcher leagues, but he's certainly an ideal second option in 2-catcher formats. In my 2-catcher league, 12 teams, I've been using Michael McHenry at catcher. I'd certainly take him over that because I think he's going to play more, and he's shown that he has a decent level of offense. He's not available in that league for me to grab, but if he was, I'd make that swap. So he's right in there, comfortably in there in that 12 to 20 range of not quite a starter in 1-catcher leagues, but definitely worth having in 2-catcher leagues.
Yeah, and as talented as that Blue Jays lineup is, Dioner Navarro typically gets to hit 5th or 6th in that lineup. So he's hitting behind some of these on-base stalwarts like Edwin Encarnacion, Jose Bautista, Russell Martin when the two are in the lineup together. So interestingly, he gets a somewhat favorable lineup spot, and that definitely helps his RBI potential, even if he doesn't have a gaudy number at this point this year. Obviously, partly due to injury and only tallying 78 plate appearances so far. But and another thing that you touched on that I really like in any catcher is the fact that he doesn't spend all of his time catching. He does get some at bats as a designated hitter, so not that wear and tear that you typically see from a catcher who is catching 120 plus games, still getting the plate appearances, but not getting that wear down that comes with donning the tools of ignorance. So I really agree with your ranking. 12 through 16, 17 for catchers. Definitely a very good high-end catcher 2 and 2-catcher leagues of 12 teams or more. So I like Navarro, and even if he's dealt, it's really a win-win situation. He stays in Toronto and he continues to get at-bats as a designated hitter, part-time catcher, or he gets dealt someplace where he's a full-time catcher and you're assured that he's not going to lose any playing time at the designated hitter position should a guy like Justice Smoke, for instance, get hot. But I like Navarro. I think he's a must-add in deep leagues if he is available, if you do start 2 catchers, or if you happen to be in a league where you have an underperforming catcher 1 and the options are a little light. Navarro is definitely a good add as well. Moving on to the forum, we've got 3 questions this week. The first is submitted by user Wild Stallions. In a 12-team head-to-head keeper league with scoring that favors hitters, and you're able to keep 3 with no penalty in this league, Wild Stallions is considering offering Miguel Cabrera and Chris Sale for Mike Trout and Michael Brantley. Given the scoring that includes junk categories like complete games, shutouts, losses for pitchers, walks allowed, and blown saves, and offensive categories such as singles, doubles, triples, walks, and OPS, I'd be in favor of making that deal. I think Trout's definitely the best keeper in that bunch. I mean, in any league, outside of the strangest of scoring formats, Trout remains the best keeper. I love Bryce Harper, but Trout's done a little bit longer, does still add some more value with the stolen bases. So I think that this roster has the pitching to absorb the loss of Sale. Boost is given to Michael Brantley with these hitting categories. So I'm not quite sure the other owner will accept the deal, but I have no problem throwing it out there. What do you think, RJ?
It's a tough call for me with all those extra categories. Trout's, like you said, clearly the best of the bunch in a keeper league, but I think there is a pretty big drop off from the value of Sale to Brantley. I think Sale has a lot of value in this league. I would consider him as one of my 3 keepers in this league. In this particular deal, I think the overall team probably would have just as many holes as it had pre-trade. If you're committed to getting Trout and this is what you think it's going to take, then I'm fine with it. But since this owner is the one thinking of offering the trade, I'd probably go back to the drawing board and try to find a different combination of players to get something done. That'd be less of a sideways move, something that involves Miggy, for sure, and Trout, but then maybe giving a lesser piece and not getting back a guy like Brantley, maybe giving up like a Carlos Gonzalez that Trout can slide in there in the outfield, or one of the lesser pitchers to get something done because like Carlos Rodon or something like that. But I don't know that I would trade Cabrera and Sale. I think that it just opened up some holes in this roster.
All right, the next question is submitted by user Afern401 in an AL-only Roto League. I'm assuming it's a redraft because Afern does not specify. They're in need of pitching and have been offered Jesse Hahn for Byron Buxton. Now, this was before news that Byron Buxton hit the disabled list today. I would have made the swap before that disabled list news anyways. Would you make the swap as well, RJ?
Yeah, if I was on the fence at all, I'd definitely go ahead and accept the deal if it's still on the table with Buxton on the DL. I think Hahn's a solid piece, though I'd be much happier with him if he got back to last year's strikeout rate. In a dynasty league, I, of course, wouldn't make this deal in a million years, but in a redraft, I think it's fine.
And the final question is submitted by user Johnny Tuttle. In a deep 12-team dynasty league, Johnny Tuttle is flush with starting pitching and in need of relief help. He's toying with the idea of dealing Colin McHugh for Dellin Betances and Tim Anderson. Is that a move you'd make?
I'm a McHugh owner in my dynasty league, so I certainly can attest that the Astros pitcher has been far inferior this season to his breakout last year. He hasn't been nearly as bad as his 4.80 ERA would suggest, but after striking out better than 9 batters per 9 innings last year, he's managed just a 7.3 K per 9 mark in 2015. While I think it's safe to expect some rebound to that, I wouldn't hesitate to ship him off for a quality piece. And calling Betances just quality may be selling him short at this point. He, of course, has that amazing strikeout rate. He's getting the benefit of the saves with Andrew Miller's sideline. And while the lefty's eventual return could curb some of his value, it's certainly worth grabbing him in exchange for McHugh, I think. Throw in a solid infield prospect in the mix with Anderson, who was actually rated a top 100 guy across the board before the season, including a number 39 ranking by Baseball Prospectus. I think grabbing that kind of piece is just icing on the cake here. I'd definitely make that move.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I would be inclined to do the deal if it were just McHugh and Betances in a 1-for-1. And getting Anderson's kind of a coup. I mean, he is posting good minor league numbers, has good scouting reports, and as you noted, is a top 100 prospect. And that's not just because of the glove as shortstop. He can hit for some average, steal some bases, and there is some power projection, at least according to the future power tool listed on Fangraphs. So I do like Anderson as a nice little get on the side of getting Betances. And even if Betances moves back to a setup role when Miller is healthy, I still think he'll vulture some saves, and you have to love the work that he's doing in terms of boosting ratios and bumping that strikeout rate up. So I'm with you. I still think there is some rebound possibility from McHugh. I wouldn't give him away, but this isn't a deal where you're giving him away. So this is a move that I like making as well.
Yeah, in my particular dynasty league, it's hard to find quality starting pitching. So everybody puts an emphasis on starting pitching in that league. And relief pitching is kind of shrugged to the side. You know, it's a little the point system set up to where middle relievers do pretty well. So it's not necessarily a thing you would do to trade a quality starting pitcher for a quality relief pitcher if you think that they're on the same level. In that particular format, I'm still taking this trade if someone offers it to me as a McHugh owner. So in that basically means to me in most formats, I like that deal as well, because I think in my league it skews more towards starting pitching anyway. So I definitely like it.
Yeah, so I mean, you have to love it in a standard league. If you're going to accept that in a league that slants more heavily towards starting pitching, then it becomes pretty close to a no-brainer in a standard league. And on that note, we're going to wrap up the MLB Rundown. Thank you for joining us this week, listeners, and thank you for joining me this week, RJ.
Yep, thanks.
Good luck in the competition tonight, and good luck to all of the fantasy gamers out there. Win some head-to-head matchups and make the move up the standings in Roto leagues. Take care and check back next week.